Hi everyone, I'm Madeline Hallahan, and today I'm going to be talking about something that might sound kind of technical at first, but is actually super important. How we as a country and as a state plan for emergencies and disasters. So, we're going to look at two different plans: the National Response Framework, which is kind of like the master game plan for the whole country, and Arizona's Emergency Operations Plan, which is more specific to the kind of emergencies we deal with right here in Arizona. So, the big idea behind this presentation is simple. Even though there's one big national plan, states like Arizona need to tweak and tailor their plan so it actually works for their people, their landscape, and their risks. Because let's face it, what we deal with here in Arizona looks very different than what people will deal with in Florida or Minnesota or New York. So, all right, so let's start by just setting the scene a little bit. Imagine there's a major disaster, a wildfire, maybe, or even a massive flood. And in that moment, everyone wants to do the same thing for help, or wants the same thing for help to arrive quickly, for everyone to stay safe and calm, and for things to get back to normal as soon as they are possible too. But getting there kind of takes some planning, teamwork, and coordination. And that's not just during the emergencies, but way before it even happens. And that's where these two emergency plans come into play. The National Response Framework, which is also known as the NRF, is the big picture, like blueprint created by FEMA. It helps guide how the federal government works with states, local agencies, tribes, nonprofits, and even businesses when something major does happen. But the thing is each state is different. So we don't have hurricanes here in Arizona. What we do have is extreme heat, desert wildfires, and flash floods, and a lot of rural areas that are really hard to reach. So Arizona has made its own plan called the Emergency Operations Plan, which is also known as the EOP, and it follows the guidelines for the guidelines of the NRF, but it fills in like the gaps with details to make sure it makes sense for our environment and our specific communities here in Arizona. So let's talk more about what the National Response Framework is specifically. The NRF is basically like a really detailed, really organized group project plan for the entire country. FEMA created it, and it's now in its fourth edition, or yeah, edition. So it's something they've been constantly improving over time. The main goals of the NRF is to make sure everyone works together smoothly, no matter if it's local police department or a big federal agency. To also make sure the plan is flexible, so it can be used for both a small incident or a huge disaster. And the whole community approach, which is a fancy way of saying everyone's involved, not just like government officials, but also like businesses, volunteers, and everyday people just like you and me. And one of the key tools inside the NRF is the Incident Command System, which is known as the ICS. And this is how response teams stay organized when things get kind of crazy and hectic. And it breaks down everything into like certain roles, kind of like assigning jobs in a group project. That way, people don't step on each other's toes and focus on what they do best, and the problem will just be solved more quickly. So now let's kind of focus in on Arizona specifically. Arizona's EOP is kind of like the local version of the NRF. It takes the big, broad ideas from the national plan and turns them kind of into a real specific action that works specifically in our state. So why is this necessary? Well, Arizona is kind of its own beast when it comes to disasters. We have extreme summer heat that can actually be life-threatening. We have wildfires that spread quickly across our dry desert lands. We have sudden, powerful flash floods specifically during monsoon season, and we've got wide open spaces where help might take a while to reach. So Arizona's EOP walks through how to prepare for these events. It explains who does what, how local and state agencies talk to each other, and what to do when things get really serious. One example of the EOP's heat emergency plan is it includes things like cooling centers, water distributions, and special outreach to people at most risks, such as like the elderly or the outdoor workers and even homeless, which we have a lot of homeless in Phoenix, specifically where the heat is bad, as well as up here in Flagstaff. So it also has like a detailed plan for wildfires, where shelter will be set up, how evacuations are handled, and how we coordinate with neighboring states to get more firefighters help if we do need them. All right, so let's just go through and compare both NRF and Arizona's EOP. So both of them want the same thing. a fast, coordinated, and effective response when disaster does strike. But they go about it a little bit differently. The NRF is like a master recipe. It gives you the structure, the ingredients, and the steps, but it leaves room for states to make their own version based on what they have going on in that specific state. So Arizona's EOP is that personalized version. It dives deep into local risks like wildfires and heat waves. It also puts more emphasis on local leadership, especially in the early stages of a disaster. And that makes sense here, especially in rural areas. If something happens in a small town up north, it's the local emergency teams who are going to be the first on the scene, not someone from Washington, D.C. or something like that. So Arizona's plan makes sure that they are equipped to take charge right away when that disaster hits. It's also worth noting that Arizona's EOP is more detailed and specific. The NRF just gives the structure, and the EOP fills in the blanks with what actually works in our specific communities. So one of the coolest things about the NRF is how flexible it is. It's not meant to be a strict rule book. It's more of a framework, which is in its name. And Arizona takes advantage of that flexibility to make their plan actually work here. So for example, we talked about the heat emergencies earlier. Arizona's EOP includes step-by-step guides on how to respond to heat waves, like opening cooling centers or shelters, and partnering with community organizations to get water to those who need it the most. And when it comes to wildfires, the EOP outlines exactly how to request help, how to evacuate entire communities, and even how to set up temporary shelters. It includes plans for using helicopters or aircrafts to drop water in hard-to-reach places like the reservations. So one thing I really do appreciate about Arizona's EOP is how it considers our tribal communities. Arizona is home to 22 federally recognized tribes, and a lot of those communities live in remote areas. The EOP includes strategies for working respectfully and efficiently with tribal governments, since they are kind of different, and that's not something that every state does include. So we are lucky here in Arizona that we do have that. So while the NRF encourages a whole community approach, Arizona kind of takes that idea and adds more depth and fluff into it. It brings in those community-specific needs that the national plan can't really fully address on its own. So kind of to bring it all together, the National Response Framework gives us a big structured way to handle emergencies as a country. It keeps everyone on the same page, especially when disasters cross state lines or when local help just isn't enough. But Arizona's Emergency Operations Plan is what makes all that work on a local level. It is what the national plan it's what makes the national plan feel more real for the people who actually live here, more practical for the things we deal with in this state specifically. So as emergencies become more frequent because of climate change, urban development, or just how unpredictable nature can be, having both levels of planning is super important. You need the structure and the specifics, and you need the national guidelines and local flexibility. So yeah, these plans might seem like a bunch of official documents at first, but they're actually what keeps our people safe as well as the rest of the country safe. So they're the reason help arrives so quickly, the reason local teams know what they're doing specifically, and they're the reason why we bounce back so quickly after a disaster strikes. So before we wrap up, I want to leave you with a few questions to think about, and I also will share a few of my own thoughts. So first question is, should every state have their own emergency operations plan? And personally, I think yes. No two states are exactly the same. What works in a snowy state like Minnesota, probably won't work here in Arizona, which it's just desert. So states need to build their own plans around their unique risks, geography, and communities. And then question number 2 is the National Response Framework flexible enough for everyone? And I think it is for the most part, but that's only if the states actually take the time to understand it and to adapt to it properly. The NRF is meant to just be a foundation. It's not a one-size-fits-all solution, and states that rely only on the federal plan might be kind of caught off guard when a real emergency happens. And then question number 3 is, what's more important in a disaster, federal support or local leadership? And that's kind of a tricky one to answer, but I'd say local leadership is more important at the start. Local teams are the first responders. They know the area, they know the people, and they act fast. So, on the other hand, federal support definitely becomes crucial if things escalate, but if not, local is definitely more important. And then the last question is, are we doing enough to include vulnerable and tribal communities? And I don't think we are. Arizona's EOP tries, but there's still a long ways to go. We need more culturally respectful communication, more resources in remote areas, and real partnerships, not just one time outreach. So disasters don't hit everyone the same way, so our plans should not be one size fits all either. So, as we come to an end, I just want to leave you with a few final thoughts. Disaster is really like finding effective planning to learn how to work with it and make sure it does not happen as often and it gets solved quickly. While the National Response Framework gives us kind of a strong foundation, states like Arizona show us how crucial it is to tailor those plans to meet local specific needs. Arizona has made great strides, but there's still a lot of room for improvement, especially when it comes to making sure like vulnerable populations are protected. Um, so I believe that local leadership is key to responding quickly and effectively. Arizona has proven that, and with the right plans in place, local governments are often the best equipped to take charge during the early stages of a disaster. But as we have seen with Arizona's unique challenges, we can't forget the importance of working with tribal communities and those in remote areas. Disaster response can't be, like I've said, a one size fits all approach. It needs to be tailored to that specific community. So now it is our turn. We are all part of the next generation of people who can help improve disaster response, whether it's through careers in emergency management. We can all contribute to making our country and our community safer and more prepared for when disaster does happen, because it is really not, you can't tell, and it's very unplanned. And these are the references that I use, so just like a quick shout out to the sources that did help me put this presentation together. A lot of the info about the NRF comes straight from FEMA's 2019 version. That's kind of go-to guide for how the federal government handles emergencies and how they expect states to jump in and coordinate. And then for Arizona specifically, I used the state's 2022 Emergency Operations Plan. That's where I found all the details on how Arizona deals with stuff like wildfires, flash floods, and those intense summer heat waves. Some of the deeper insights, like how states tweak the national guide for how local or personal guidelines or how local communities step in, came from articles from like Smith and Jones, Miller and Brown. They're all really helpful, and they take on the relationship between federal planning and real world actions, especially for rural and tribal areas. So yeah, these are the sources that help me make all sense to this presentation. And if you're ever curious to learn more about the emergency planning, I definitely do recommend checking out these sources in these websites. But thank you for listening, and I look forward to hearing your thoughts on these ideas. What do you think we can do starting today to improve how we respond to emergencies, not only here in Arizona, but overall throughout the country?